This is Off the Cuff, and I'm Steve from TorahFamily.org. When it comes to discussing the end times, it seems the most common phrase heard is the birth pains. However, I'm concerned there's a misconception of what that phrase is referring to. So, let's dig into it by starting in Matthew 24. Starting in verse 6. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Okay, now that we've read it all, let's get into it. Notice in verse 6 where Yeshua said we would hear of wars and rumors of wars. But then he said not to be worried about these. He said these are supposed to happen. But it's not the end. Again, wars and rumors of wars are not the end, meaning they aren't the birth pains. So anytime we hear people talking about wars and rumors of wars, well, remember, that's not the end. These things have to happen. But notice the next two verses. They say, nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. All these are the beginning of birth pains. He didn't say when you see a war here or see a war over there that it's the beginning of the birth pains. He said all these things are the beginning of birth pains. And he didn't say when you see an earthquake here or hear of one over there that it's the beginning of the birth pains. Again, all these things are the beginning of the birth pains. There have always been wars, according to Yeshua. He said they have to happen. Plus, there have always been earthquakes and famines. Secular history and biblical history shows there have always been earthquakes and famines. But they aren't the beginning of the birth pains. The common response to this is, yeah, but Steve, earthquakes are happening faster and harder all over the world now. And that may be the case. However, Yeshua didn't say when you see earthquakes come faster and harder that would be the beginning of the birth pains. The Greek here actually says kata topos, which means according to places or according to the passages. In other words, according to what was written. We'll come back to this a little later. Now, verse 6 says we would see and hear of wars, but not to worry because it's not the end. But then in verse 7, he said nation would rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and that these are a part of the birth pains. So, what's the difference between verses 6 and 7? Isn't verse 7 just describing the wars and rumors of wars? Actually, no. Verse 6 is talking about wars with multiple nations. However, please notice how verse 7 is giving a single nation against a single nation, and a single kingdom against a single kingdom. Yeshua is not discussing any typical war between two nations and two kingdoms. It's regarding two specific nations and two specific kingdoms. So now the question is, what are the two nations and two kingdoms being discussed here? First, let's discuss the two nations. To do that, we need to do a quick history lesson. Genesis chapter 25, starting in verse 21. Now Isaac pleaded with Yahweh for his wife, because she was barren. And Yahweh granted his plea, and Rebekah his wife conceived. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, If all is well, Why am I like this?" So she went to inquire of Yahweh. And Yahweh said to her, "Two nations are in your womb. Two peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Two nations are in your womb." It doesn't take much to see that there was contention between these two brothers throughout their lives. Esau selling his birthright to Jacob. Jacob deceiving Isaac to steal Esau's firstborn blessing. Jacob running from Esau. Jacob fearful for his life when he returned. There seemed to be a continual contention between these two brothers, and we see it literally started in the womb. I believe it will be these two nations reigniting their struggle between each other like never before in the end. Why do I say that? Please consider Jeremiah chapter 16. "But now I will send for many fishermen, declares Yahweh, and they will catch them. After that, I will send for many hunters, and they will hunt them down on every mountain and hill and from the crevices of the rocks." You're probably wondering, well, what's this verse have to do with anything? Well, Yeshua said he would make his disciples fishers of men, right? But when the birth pains begin, it seems that this time will come to an end, and those who rejected will then be hunted by the hunters. But you're probably still wondering what this still has to do with Jacob and Esau being the two nations at war in the end times. Well, please consider Genesis chapter 25. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man, staying among the tents. Esau, the hunter. The time is coming when the nation of Esau, the nation of hunters, will be summoned by Yahweh, and they'll answer accordingly. You know, I'm cautious when it comes to the extra books that are not in the Bible. However, several of these books are mentioned in the scriptures, and debates can go back and forth regarding the question if the current copies that we have of these books are the ones that are actually referred to in the scriptures. And I'm not here to go into that debate today, okay? I can see both sides of the debates when it comes to those books. Nonetheless, I'm very cautious in referring to them, okay? Again, I understand that they're referenced, especially like the book of Jasher I know is referenced. Enoch is referenced, but I'm just cautious, okay? And that's just me, again, not going to go into that debate. Maybe some other day, okay? Well, maybe not. Nonetheless, however, that all being said, I did find it interesting when a friend of mine once told me that according to the book of Jasher, it was Esau, the man who was a hunter, was the one who killed Nimrod. You see, I find it interesting because Nimrod was noted as a mighty hunter in the book of Genesis. But according to Jasher chapter 27, Nimrod grew jealous of Esau's hunting ability. The reason I bring the element of Nimrod up is because of how the Bible references him as a mighty hunter. If you haven't researched the connection of Nimrod to Valentine's Day, we encourage you to do so. Now, I'm not saying I agree with everything out there regarding the subject. However, there are some points we believe everyone needs to consider. When you look into the traditions that have been carried down through Valentine's Day, you see how Cupid is actually baby Nimrod, the baby hunter carrying his bow. Now, that being the case, let me share a thought I've been open to for some time now. Could there be a connection between Nimrod, the mighty hunter with his bow, to the first seal in Revelation? It's the seal where we see the white horse whose rider is holding a bow. Now, before you think, Steve, that's silly, hold on a moment. Don't you think it's interesting how Revelation 17 says the beast once was, now is not, and will come up out of the abyss and go to his destruction? It says the beast is a king. Nimrod was a king who once was, but wasn't at the time of this writing. So could it be Nimrod who comes out of the abyss? Nimrod raised from the dead? Now, not resurrected, meaning with a new body, but raised to life to die again. This is also the one who attacks the two witnesses in Revelation chapter 11. With these verses in mind, I believe it may not be such a crazy thought that the rider holding the bow on the white horse could be Nimrod himself. It's something to consider anyway. Plus, I also find it interesting that Valentine's Day normally falls in the 11th month of the Hebrew calendar. For more on that, you will want to refer to our teaching, The Winter Timeline. It shows where the 11th month is where things could begin. How it all ties together, if it all ties together, I don't know. But I do find it interesting nonetheless. Now, regardless of how and when it all plays out, the time is coming when Yahweh will call for the hunters. The time is coming when the conflict between these two nations will reach its climax, and all hell will break loose on this earth. Now, that being said, this leads us to the kingdom rising against kingdom. Just as it says it will be a single nation rising against a single nation, the same is true about the kingdoms. It will be a single kingdom rising against a single kingdom. And just as I believe it will be the nation of Esau rising against Jacob, I believe it will be the kingdom of darkness rising against the kingdom of light. This will be when the devil takes on Michael in Revelation chapter 12, where it says there will be war in heaven. Revelation chapter 12. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Then verse 12, Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short. The final clash of the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of light begins at this moment. The kingdom of light and darkness, just as Paul described in the book of Colossians. However, please notice the timing when we see this epic battle taking place. It's right after the birth given in the storyline, after the resurrection. So the birth, the resurrection, takes place moments before this heavenly battle explodes. This takes us back to Matthew 24. Again, all these are the beginning of the birth pains. The nation against nation, the kingdom against kingdom, the famines and earthquakes, all together at once. Now you're probably thinking, but Steve, you haven't discussed the earthquakes and famines yet. But Revelation 12 does, even though the earthquake is never mentioned. It's referenced by way of the resurrection. So, how does the resurrection in Revelation chapter 12, which takes place just before the two kingdoms clash, have to do with the earthquakes and famines in Matthew 24? Well, as noted earlier, verse 7 doesn't say various places regarding the earthquakes. It says kata topos, meaning according to places, or according to that which is written. So, what was written about an earthquake that ties together with the resurrection? Isaiah 24. Isaiah 24 is all about an earthquake and judgment coming on the survivors. Please take some time and read chapters 24 through 26, and you'll see how they flow perfectly together. After discussing the earthquake, chapter 26 discusses the earth giving birth to her dead, the resurrection. Verse 19, "But your dead will live, their bodies will rise. You who dwell in the dust, wake up and shout for joy. Your dew is like the dew of the morning. The earth will give birth to her dead. Go, my people, into your rooms and shut the doors behind you. Hide yourselves for a little while until his wrath has passed by. See, Yahweh is coming out of his dwelling to punish the people of the earth for their sins. The earth will disclose the blood shed upon her. She will conceal her slain no longer." So we see the earth gives birth to her dead, the resurrection. But then we see Isaiah 66 says the birth happens before the birth pains. Let me say that again. The birth takes place before the birth pains. The prophet even mentions how crazy it sounds, but that's what will happen. The birth, the resurrection, before the birth pains. Isaiah 66, verse 7. "Before she goes into labor, she gives birth. Before the pains come upon her, she delivers a son. Who has ever heard of such a thing? Who has ever seen such things? Can a country be born in a day, or a nation be brought forth in a moment? Yet no sooner is Zion in labor that she gives birth to her children." Please notice in verse 7 how it says a son is born. This matches with Revelation chapter 12. So just as we see the resurrection take place before the battle of the two kingdoms in Revelation 12, we see the resurrection just before the birth pains, the earthquake in Isaiah 66. And when the earthquake takes place, the famines immediately take over. This confirms what Yeshua said. He said all the birth pains begin at the same time, but the birth, that being the resurrection, takes place a split second before. Thus, Yeshua's words in Luke 21:36, "Be always on watch and pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen, and that you may be able to stand before the Son of Man." Since the earth gives birth to her dead, the resurrection, before the birth pains take place, then we know we aren't seeing the birth pains as described by Yeshua taking place yet. Those birth pains all take place at the same time. Yeshua said they all are the start of the birth pains, meaning they all take place at the same time in one cohesive birth pain to start them all off. He said all these are the beginning of birth pains. This also explains Yeshua's words later on in Matthew 24 and how the world will be caught off guard when it all starts. It's because just as the flood happened unexpectedly, there will be no buildup of birth pains in the end. It will all start at one time. Everything will be going on as usual, and then suddenly everything will catch the people off guard. So the next time someone says we're seeing the birth pains beginning, encourage them to reconsider what the birth pains are. We may be seeing the Braxton Hicks, I'll give you that, but not the birth pains. Trust me, there will be no doubt whatsoever when the birth pains begin. It will be a time that we do not want to see. Thus, Yeshua's words for us to pray that we escape it all. Well, that's all I have. Think about it. Pray about it. But more than anything, be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Until next time, Shalom.